Imagine sitting hooked up to a polygraph machine.
Okay.
You're staring directly into the eyes of the person administering the test, right?
Yeah.
And you are telling a massive, life-altering lie.
The kind that would ruin everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Something that would just completely destroy your reputation if it got out. Now, for you and me, our bodies would be absolutely screaming.
Oh, yeah. Your heart rate would be through the roof.
Right. Our palms would be sweating. Our stomachs would do that sickening little flip. And the needles in the machine would just be violently jumping across the paper.
That's the normal human response, yeah.
But the person we are examining today, her heart rate is completely flat.
Totally baseline.
Her palms are bone dry. She feels absolutely nothing. So today, on this deep dive, we are stepping directly into the mind of someone who lives in that exact reality.
It's a fascinating space to explore.
We have sourced this deeply revealing, frankly, astonishing interview transcript from a diagnosed female sociopath. And she also happens to have narcissistic personality disorder.
Yeah, and we're looking at a fundamentally different operating system for a human being here.
Completely different.
And just to set the stage, the mission today is not to tell some, true crime horror story.
Right, no sensationalizing.
Exactly. We are not looking to sensationalize trauma or paint someone as this cartoon villain. Instead, this material offers, well, a masterclass in understanding the actual mechanics of manipulation.
We are going to decode how antisocial personality disorder, or ASPD, operates in everyday situations.
I mean, we're talking about the boardroom, the dating pool, your own friend group.
So if you are listening to this right now, whether you're just naturally fascinated by psychology, or maybe you are trying to figure out some incredibly difficult, confusing people in your own life.
Which a lot of us are.
Right. Or, you simply want to equip yourself to avoid being manipulated in the future. This deep dive is going to give you a really fascinating, albeit somewhat chilling, new lens on human behavior.
It really is.
But before we get into the tactical details of exactly how she operates, we need to lay down the psychological bedrock. What exactly is the baseline definition of ASPD according to the clinical material we have?
Right, so the clinical baseline established in the source is that an individual with ASPD is essentially wired without a conscience.
Wow, just entirely without one.
Pretty much. We are talking about a profound biological lack of empathy, a total absence of guilt, and zero remorse for actions that harm other people.
Zero remorse.
None. It's a framework where someone will lie, manipulate, and actively use the people around them to extract exactly what they want. And the crucial mechanism to understand here is that they do not feel a single pang of regret about it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because that specific lack of feeling, that biological void you just mentioned, that is the engine that drives everything else we're going to explore today.
It really is the core of it all.
And the subject in our source material points out this massive societal misconception. Like, we tend to think of individuals with these traits as having one terrifying, dark, overarching personality.
Like they just walk around radiating menace all day.
Right, like a movie villain. But she explicitly states she doesn't have one personality. She has dozens.
Yeah, she refers to this as her mask collection.
Mask collection.
Yes, and to understand why she needs a collection of masks, we really have to look closely at her biology. She describes experiencing absolutely no internal somatic response to stress or guilt.
Okay, wait, explain the somatic part for a second.
So going back to your polygraph example, somatic markers are those physical sensations, the tight chest, the flushed face, the accelerated breathing that our brains use to signal emotion.
Ah, okay. The body telling the brain how to feel.
Exactly. But because she lacks those internal signals, she doesn't naturally feel the emotions that dictate social behavior, therefore she has to perform them.
Which is just a wild cognitive load to carry if you think about it. Like, if I lie to a friend, my body betrays me. I feel the guilt physically.
Your body won't let you get away with it.
Right. But because she feels nothing, she has to consciously calculate and perform the exact emotion she knows society expects in any given millisecond.
It's exhausting, but she's mastered it.
She actually describes herself as being highly skilled at optics. She talks about being able to walk into a room full of political opponents, people who ostensibly despise everything she stands for, and seamlessly blend in.
Making them all believe she is their closest ally and confidant.
Yes. It means every single social interaction she has is completely reverse engineered.
And what's fascinating here is how methodical and deeply analytical this reverse engineering actually is.
How so?
Well, she isn't just throwing on a generic friendly persona. She is actively scanning the person in front of her, identifying their psychological vulnerabilities, and deploying highly specific, historically tested archetypes to exploit their natural human instincts.
I picture it like a social Swiss Army knife.
That's a perfect analogy.
Rather than just reacting naturally to the ebb and flow of a conversation, she walks into a room, scans the environment, figures out what specific emotional mechanism will open you up, and clicks out the exact psychological tool needed to pick the lock of your personality.
She's picking the lock, exactly.
Let's look at the first tool she pulls out. The source calls this the one-do, or the damsel in distress mask.
Oh, the damsel in distress. This is perhaps her most effective mask, particularly when she needs to disarm people who might naturally perceive her as a threat.
Who does she usually use this on?
The source notes she often uses this on men or on women who actively harbor a dislike for her. And it's not just a shift in vocabulary, it is a full-body physical performance.
Yeah, the transcript points out that she literally demonstrates this physical shift on camera during the interview.
It's almost theatrical.
It is. She visibly lowers her vocal register to sound softer. She tilts her head slightly to the side, which exposes the neck, a universal sign of submission.
Right, playing into evolutionary cues.
She shrugs her shoulders inward to appear physically smaller and less imposing. And she adopts this profoundly naive, wide-eyed stare.
And what kind of things does she say in that mode?
She uses phrases like, I'm in a new city all by myself, I don't know anyone, I can't even afford food, I just really need help.
Wow.
It is a devastatingly effective tactic because it completely weaponizes our biological instinct to protect.
It really bypasses your critical thinking apparatus entirely. I mean, when you see a human being making themselves small, vulnerable, and signaling distress, your evolutionary programming just takes over.
We can't help it.
No, humans survived as a species through mutual aid. We are quite literally wired to rescue the vulnerable.
Right.
So the moment your brain registers her distress and you step into that rescuer role, you have ceded complete control of the power dynamic to her.
Even though you think you're the one in charge because you're helping.
Exactly. You think you are saving her without realizing she engineered the entire scenario to put you exactly where she wants you.
But wait, let me ask you about this. If someone is naturally suspicious of her, say, a woman who already genuinely dislikes her, how does playing the victim actually win them over? Would they just see right through it?
You would think so, right? But it actually exploits a completely different facet of human ego.
How does that work?
Well, for someone who dislikes her, stepping into the rescuer role provides a massive ego boost. It places the rescuer in a position of moral and practical superiority.
Oh, I see.
So the sociopath is perfectly willing to temporarily play the pathetic inferior if it means she gains access to your resources, your trust, or your social network.
That makes terrifying sense. She trades temporary status for long-term leverage.
Exactly. It's a calculated investment.
And speaking of leverage, that brings us to the therapist mask, which I'd argue is infinitely more insidious than the damsel.
Oh, it absolutely is.
This is where she feigns deep vulnerability specifically to extract your darkest secrets.
Yeah, the mechanics of the therapist mask rely on the psychological rule of reciprocity.
Okay, tell me about that.
She will share a calculated, often entirely fabricated, or at least highly curated piece of vulnerability about herself. She knows that when she's interacting with an empath, which is how she refers to people with typical functioning emotional responses.
Which is most people listening, hopefully.
She knows that sharing trauma acts as a conversational trigger for those people.
Right, because if I come to you and share a deep, dark fear I have, social conditioning basically dictates that you owe me a piece of vulnerability in return to balance the scales.
Precisely. The empath feels this overwhelming obligation to trauma dump in return, to show solidarity, to prove that they owe a safe space.
But here is the horrifying reality of that exchange. While you were sitting there spilling your guts, thinking you were having this profound, deep bonding moment of mutual vulnerability, she's just sitting there.
Just collecting data.
Exactly. She's nodding, she's comforting you, she looks like the best, most understanding friend in the entire world. But internally...
It's all filing cabinets.
Yes. Her brain is coldly and systematically cataloging every single insecurity, every deep-seated fear, and every secret you are handing her.
The transcript explicitly states she stores this information purely as leverage.
She keeps it in a mental vault, just in case you ever betray her in the future. It looks like compassion, But it's purely reconnaissance.
Which perfectly segues into the third primary tool in her kit, the femme fatale mask.
Ah, yes.
This is utilized heavily, almost exclusively, in romantic dynamics. And the core function of this mask is playing hot and cold.
It's about maintaining a suffocating air of mystery.
Totally. She might be incredibly warm, attentive, and affectionate one day, and then completely ghost a romantic partner for 7 straight days.
But I want to push back on the intent here for a second, because my initial thought was that she does this to purposefully torture the guy.
Right, that's what a lot of people assume.
But she admits in the source that it isn't always some grand Machiavellian plot to inflict pain. Sometimes she just finds the person burdensome and literally loses interest.
Yeah, she just gets bored.
Yet, the resulting effect on the target is absolute psychological domination.
It is. The intent might occasionally be passive, but the result is active control. By deploying this intermittent reinforcement, which, by the way, is the exact same psychological mechanism that makes slot machines so addictive.
Oh, wow. The slot machine effect.
Exactly. The romantic target is kept completely off balance. They are constantly trying to decipher what they did wrong to cause the cold phase and what they need to do to win back the warm phase.
Which means their entire mental real estate is occupied by her. They aren't focusing on their work, their friends, or their own well-being. They are entirely consumed by the puzzle of her behavior.
It's brilliant in its cruelty.
It really is.
Yeah.
But all of these masks, the damsel, the therapist, the femme fatale, they all require a tremendous amount of cognitive energy to maintain. Like, she is constantly performing.
Always on stage.
So if the masks are how a sociopath blends in and manipulates a calm sea, what happens when there is a storm? What happens when the mask slips? Or she is directly challenged and doesn't have the time to calculate a response?
Well, that transitions us into one of the most volatile sections of the source material, her relationship with rage.
Let's get into it.
Because she lacks those gradual somatic warning signs we discussed earlier. You know, the slow physical buildup of typical anger, the rising blood pressure over an hour of frustration. Her rage states activate incredibly quickly.
Like a light switch.
Exactly. And she describes experiencing rage in 2 distinct frequencies, hot and cold.
Let's examine the hot rage first. This is immediate, it is highly impulsive, and it is brutally confrontational.
And very destructive.
The source shows it almost always triggers when she feels her grandiosity is threatened, when she feels belittled or looked down upon.
There's a perfect example provided from a swimming pool incident.
Oh, yeah. So she was swimming with a friend of Asian descent, and a white woman approached them, told them they weren't swimming properly, and insisted they needed to wear armbands.
Right.
The subject instantly perceived this as racial profiling and just absolutely exploded.
The acceleration there is what is so notable. She went from 0 to 100 in a fraction of a second. She screamed at the woman, publicly accused her of racism, and actively tried to get the woman fired from her job right there on the pool deck.
Wow.
There was no mediation, no attempt to educate or de-escalate, just immediate destruction.
And it wasn't an isolated incident. There's another example at a blood test clinic.
Right, the phlebotomist.
Yes, so the technician was preparing her arm, rubbed her skin, and casually asked if the coloration was dirt or a fake tan.
A terrible thing to say, obviously.
Of course. And the subject, who was brown-skinned, went into an immediate hot rage. But she didn't just yell at the technician. She escalated it to management and successfully got that technician fired.
The reaction is entirely disproportionate. It's immediate, and it's aimed at the total destruction of the person's livelihood.
However, while the hot rage is chaotic and destructive in the moment, the cold rage is arguably much more dangerous.
Because it lacks a time limit.
Exactly. Cold rage is calculated. Endlessly patient revenge. It is an intricate plotting that can span months or even decades. She states unequivocally that she never, ever forgets a slight.
The memory for perceived disrespect is bottomless. There is a staggering example detailed in the source text that perfectly illustrates this.
Back in 2012, right?
Yeah, back in 2012, when she was a minor, she was serving as the vice president of the Young Liberals.
And real quick, the source notes this is a conservative political organization, but we need to remain entirely neutral on the politics here. The organization is just the setting for the behavior.
Exactly. The politics aren't the point. The point is the older male president of this group made a highly predatory, disgusting comment to her. He suggested something horrific, assuming his power insulated him from consequence.
And her internal response was not fear. It wasn't even hot rage. It was pure cold calculation. She
Right.
thought, all right, you want to play this game? We will play.
And here we are, more than a decade later. This man actually ended up going to prison in Texas for severe crimes completely unrelated to her.
Right. Most people would look at that and think, okay, karma served, the universe handled it, the guy is in prison, I can let this go.
But not her.
Not her at all. She states she is still actively plotting her specific personalized revenge against him. She has old text messages saved and backed up. She has phone calls from over 10 years ago recorded.
She is simply waiting for the exact right moment, perhaps when he tries to rebuild his life, to completely destroy him.
It's chilling.
It is. And the psychological threshold for this revenge is fascinating. Like, when does the cold rage dissipate?
When does it actually end for her?
She explains that it only stops when she feels a profound internal sense of satisfaction. It does not stop when the punishment fits the crime.
Right.
It stops when the target has been perfectly humiliated, when they are broken inside exactly as they attempted to break her, and when she unilaterally decides they have paid their debt to her ego.
And if you are wondering what her definition of broken looks like, we have to look at her retaliation against a Reddit snark page.
Oh, this story is unbelievable.
It's wild. So a group of women on this forum doxed her. They posted her real address, said horrific things about her character, and even posted a photograph of a man who had previously abused her, just to taunt her.
Which objectively is terrible, toxic internet behavior on their part.
Without a doubt. But her retaliation exists on a completely different stratum of reality.
It escalates from internet trolling to theatrical psychological warfare.
Theatrical doesn't even begin to cover it. She tracked down the physical address of one of the main women harassing her. First, she sent severed pig's head to this woman's house, timing it to arrive exactly during a police welfare check she had also called in.
The coordination there is insane.
Then, she hired a full mariachi band to show up at this woman's house at 6 a.m. on a weekend, paying them entirely in cash upon arrival so it couldn't be traced through her credit cards.
The level of detail.
And finally, most disturbingly, she paid an intermediary in America to bake a pie containing human feces and had it delivered to the woman's front door.
And the chilling part, she genuinely enjoyed executing every step of this. She admits she is already eagerly planning her next move for next year.
This specific sequence highlights an incredible cognitive compartmentalization within the sociopathic mind, though. She is capable of executing these wildly sadistic, highly structured revenge plots while simultaneously acting as a vocal advocate for victims in other areas of her life.
Yes. This is the part of the source material that genuinely broke my brain.
I need you to help me understand this. How does someone justify being a passionate public advocate for domestic violence victims, which she is, while simultaneously doing things like sending a feces pie?
It's a massive contradiction.
And in the same interview, she casually mentions that when she was 14 years old, she pushed another girl down a flight of concrete stairs, physically breaking the girl's leg, purely because that girl had called her friend fat.
Right.
How do you hold both of those realities? How do you campaign against violence while breaking a teenager's leg?
Well, it functions because her mind operates on an entirely subjective, internal judicial system. She freely admits to the hypocrisy.
So she knows it's hypocritical.
Oh, absolutely. But her moral compass is not anchored in universal objective principles like, violence is inherently wrong or do unto others. Her morality is based entirely on transactional loyalty and a sense of ownership.
Ownership.
Yes, she feels ownership over her friends. If you insult her friend by calling them fat, you haven't just hurt someone's feelings. You have insulted her property. You have violated her domain.
So she isn't pushing the girl down the stairs because she feels deep empathy for her friend's sadness.
Exactly. The punishment is enacted to correct a violation of her established order. It is about reasserting dominance. The universal rules of society apply to everyone else in the world, but they absolutely do not apply to her.
It's like she has appointed herself judge, jury, and executioner, operating on a complex legal code that only she possesses the manuscript for.
That's a great way to put it.
But as terrifying as the physical rage is pushing people downstairs, sending severed pig heads, that is the loud response. What terrifies me far more is the quiet response.
The invisible traps.
Yes, the trap she sets up every single day for the people who are just trying to be her friend or her colleague.
You're hitting on the core mechanism there. Physical rage is actually the less preferred tool because it is messy and draws unwanted attention from authorities.
Right, it gets you caught.
The true pervasive danger of ASPD lies in subtle, almost imperceptible manipulation. They don't just attack you head on. They build invisible prisons around you. They construct psychological cages.
Let's walk through the architecture of these cages. We'll start with the guilt cage. This relies heavily on performative hurt. It is the active weaponization of the target's empathy.
She explains that if she wants to exert control over someone or force them to comply with a demand, she will fake an injury or a grievance.
The ankle example.
Yes. The source details an example where she faked a severe ankle injury. And she doesn't just casually text, "Hey, my ankle hurts, feel bad for me." She maintains a saved cache of photographs on her phone of a real sprained ankle from years prior, ready to deploy as irrefutable proof.
Think about the mechanics of this for a second. She texts you a photo of a swollen purple ankle. She follows it up by reminding you of all the immense lengths she went to help you in the past.
Laying the groundwork.
And then she subtly implies that now, in her moment of agonizing pain, you are failing her. What happens to you in that moment?
If you're an empath, it crushes you.
If you are a normal, empathetic listener, your stomach drops, you feel terrible, you immediately overcompensate, you rush to apologize, you abandon your own plans, you rush over to help her, and you do whatever she wants just to relieve your own agonizing sense of guilt.
And without realizing it, you just locked the door of the cage from the inside.
Wow. And that dynamic leads directly into the second structure, which is the obligation cage.
Oh, this one is so common.
This is where she performs a mildly inconvenient favor for someone without them even asking. She might send a lavish bouquet of roses when you're sick, or spend an hour giving you highly detailed advice on navigating an ex-partner.
But to her, this act contains zero emotional resonance. It is purely a financial or temporal investment.
She's building a bank of favors, because if she does this mildly nice thing for you, you now feel heavily indebted to her.
The psychological weight of reciprocity kicks in.
Right. She explicitly notes that she utilizes people for their highly specific skills. She knows she isn't good at everything, so she collects people who possess the skills she lacks: a tech expert, a legal mind, a social connector.
Like collecting chess pieces.
Exactly. And I want you, the listener, to pause and reflect on this for a second. Have you ever felt this in your own life? Have you ever been caught in an obligation cage where an acquaintance did you a tiny, unprompted favor, and suddenly you felt bound to a bottomless debt?
Like you constantly had to prove your loyalty to them.
Forever paying off the interest on a favor you didn't even ask for.
It is a remarkably common dynamic when dealing with high-conflict personality types. They specifically target empaths because, to a sociopath, a conscience is not a virtue, it is a vulnerability to be exploited.
Wow.
Your capacity for guilt is simply a lever they can pull to move you around the board.
Then there is the triangulation cage, which I found to be brilliant in a very dark behavioral economics kind of way.
The negotiation tactic.
Yeah, this involves introducing a third party, or an extreme alternative, to apply pressure and force a desired outcome. The example she uses with her husband, Sam, is just stunning. She will go to him and demand he buy her a $20,000 Hermes bag.
Which she's fully aware is an absurd, completely ludicrous request.
Right. She doesn't actually expect the Hermes bag. She is utilizing a concept known in negotiation as price anchoring. She sets the anchor ridiculously high at $20,000. Her husband naturally pushes back. Perhaps an argument ensues.
Of course.
Then she pivots. She acts as though she is compromising and asks for a $2,000 Prada bag instead.
And suddenly, the husband experiences a massive wave of psychological relief. He feels like he just won a high-stakes negotiation, he saved $18,000, and he eagerly buys the Prada bag.
Which is exactly what she wanted the entire time.
Exactly. But the triangulation really activates if he resists the Prada bag.
Oh, right. What if he says no to both?
If he holds firm, she doesn't just sit there and argue with him in a vacuum. She expands the battlefield. She will go to his mother or to their mutual friends and complain about how he is treating her, framing herself as the neglected wife.
She brings in reinforcements.
She applies intense, calculated public pressure, so the environment itself forces him to comply with her initial demand.
If we look at the scale of this, these cages, guilt, obligation, triangulation, they work flawlessly on a one-to-one micro level. But the source makes it clear that individuals with ASPD also operate on a macro level.
Oh, absolutely. They don't just manipulate their spouses. They can control and decimate entire communities.
Which brings us to the concept of reputational warfare. This is how you completely destroy an opponent without ever laying a physical finger on them.
It involves isolating a target by seeding highly calculated whispers into the social ecosystem.
She details how she has successfully labeled people in her social circles as racist or homophobic, even when she knew for a fact they were not, purely to destroy their reputation and remove them as a threat.
And the whispers start incredibly small. A concerned comment to a mutual friend, a fabricated anecdote.
But they metastasize until the target loses their friends, their job prospects, and is entirely blacklisted from the community. And as a quick aside, the source material notes conservative commentator Candace Owens as someone who executes this type of reputational smearing flawlessly.
Right.
We aren't taking any political stance here whatsoever. We are simply relaying the source's observation that these specific reputational tactics are highly visible and effective in broad public arenas, not just private friend groups.
It's a recognized tactic, for sure.
But delving into these covert tactics brings up a massive, fundamental distinction in the source material: the profound difference between female and male sociopathy.
I actually push that a step further and say this is the most critical distinction in the entire analysis. Society is, to a large degree, conditioned to spot male sociopaths.
For sure. We see them in movies all the time.
Right. Men with ASPD are heavily represented in media and criminal justice systems. They are often described as messy. They tend to utilize brute force, physical violence, direct intimidation, and overt aggression. Their crimes, both social and legal, are loud.
But the female sociopath is a different entity entirely. They utilize nonviolent psychological torture, they use smearing, gossip, and relational aggression.
And if they are going to resort to extreme physical harm, they use clean methods.
Clean methods.
The source specifically mentions things like poisoning, or slowly slipping someone Valium over an extended period of time to make them seem unhinged to outsiders. It is entirely covert.
And the reason female sociopaths are so incredibly difficult for the average person to spot is because they use societal gender norms as their primary camouflage. Society is fundamentally structured to expect women to be agreeable, nurturing, maternal, and empathetic.
So when a female predator operates, she flies entirely under our cultural radar.
We literally do not possess the societal schema to look at a soft-spoken, smiling, well-dressed woman and see a calculated predator.
Right. When she cries, we assume the tears are rooted in genuine sorrow. When she offers help, we assume her empathy is real.
The gender expectation acts as an invisibility cloak.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, if their friendships and social lives are this heavily calculated, governed by cages and reputational warfare, it naturally forces us to examine romantic intimacy.
Oh man, the dating life.
How does a mind wired for total control and zero empathy handle the vulnerability of dating?
It is just as systematic, if not more so, than everything else we've discussed. Let's examine her dating life before she ultimately got married. She utilized a system she casually refers to as the rotation.
The rotation.
This is the highly structured practice of keeping multiple men on the hook simultaneously, explicitly assigning them specific emotional or financial purposes, so she never, ever gets too attached or dependent on any single one of them.
It is the emotional equivalent of a diversified financial portfolio.
It really is.
Yeah.
Let's break down the tiers of this portfolio. First, you have the regent. This is the current favorite, the primary target. But he isn't just enjoying her company.
No, he's being evaluated.
He is constantly, secretly being tested to see if he has long-term marriage potential. Can he handle her specific brand of chaos? Does he have the financial resources she demands?
And below the regent, you have the placeholder. This is the submissive, perpetually available, nice guy.
The backup.
Yeah, he lacks the alpha qualities or the resources of the regent, but he follows instructions perfectly. He is kept on the roster purely for when she is bored or when the regent is failing a test, and she requires a guaranteed immediate hit of attention and validation.
And then we get to perhaps the most manipulative dynamic of all, which she calls the decoy. This doesn't just involve the men. It involves manipulating other women.
Which is wild.
The sociopath will intentionally befriend an unattractive woman who happens to be romantically paired with a highly attractive man. The sociopath will then loudly and constantly praise the decoy woman in front of the specific men the sociopath is targeting.
Now, why on earth would she do that?
Because it triggers deep-seated status anxiety in the men. The targeted men see a lesser male succeeding with this seemingly amazing woman. Their evolutionary competitive drive kicks into overdrive, and they work twice as hard to win the sociopath's affection. She is literally playing 3D chess with human insecurities.
And once a specific man is selected from that rotation for deeper engagement, she doesn't just date him normally. She initiates a highly specific, sequenced 4-act formula of psychological terrorism to irrevocably bind him to her.
Act 1 is love bombing. We hear this term thrown around a lot in pop psychology now, but she executes it with lethal precision.
It's overwhelming.
It involves drowning the target in affection, mirroring their interests perfectly, and making them feel like they are the absolute center of the universe. It floods their brain with dopamine, completely blinding them to any red flags that might be appearing.
Once that dopamine dependency is established, she shifts to Act 2, which is the absurd threat.
The slash your tires thing.
Yes, this is where she introduces a comical yet remarkably dark threat to keep the partner's nervous system in a state of confused anxiety. For example, she might be laughing and casually say, "If you don't come over tonight, I'm going to slash your tires."
And the guy's sitting there laughing along, but internally his brain is misfiring. He doesn't know if she's joking or if she's entirely serious. His nervous system is entirely on edge, which keeps him highly attentive,
And then comes Act 3.
which I find to be the most brilliant and terrifying tool she has, the odd compliment.
This is a masterstroke of psychological manipulation. Instead of complimenting general, obvious physical traits like saying, you have beautiful eyes or you have a great smile, she praises highly specific, almost bizarre traits.
Like what?
She might compliment the exact circumference of a man's wrists or, as she mentions, the specific lack of vocal fry in a woman's voice.
I want you to think about that for a second. Think about the most hyper-specific compliment you have ever received in your life. It feels intoxicating, doesn't it?
It really does.
It makes you feel incredibly deeply seen on a level you didn't even know you craved. By noticing something that literally no one else has ever noticed, the sociopath completely bypasses your ego's normal defenses. She hooks you at the very core of your identity.
You start believing, on a subconscious level, that no one else in the entire world will ever understand you the way she does.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the final phase, Act 4, the domestic return.
Right. This is the stabilization phase, but it is deeply unstable.
How so?
She calibrates her affection to a strict ratio of 50% intense, consuming love and 50% absolute, freezing coldness.
That hot and cold ratio creates massive cognitive dissonance in the partner's brain. Normal empaths and victims of abuse often refer to this as gaslighting. But the predator in our source material doesn't use that word. She calls it interior design.
Interior design.
Yeah, she says she is just casually rearranging the furniture in someone's head so they bump into it in the dark.
Let's pause on that because the underlying neurology of that metaphor is fascinating. She controls the emotional environment so thoroughly that the victim's spatial awareness of reality degrades.
They lose their bearings.
Exactly. They stop trusting their own memories, their own reactions, and their own sanity. They rely entirely on her to tell them where the furniture is.
But here's where we hit a massive, glaring contradiction in the source text, a paradox that really stumped me.
Okay, what is it?
Despite all these manipulative tactics, all these psychological cages, the ruthless rotation, the four-act terrorism, the sociopath we are analyzing is currently happily married.
Right.
And she claims to be fiercely, even violently loyal to her inner circle of friends. How does that possibly make sense for someone without empathy?
It brings us to a concept she calls the shovel and alibi perk.
Yes. She states categorically that if a true friend calls her at 3 a.m. and says they need to hide a body, she will do it. No judgment, no moralizing, no questions asked. She will grab a shovel and drive over.
But there is a massive flip side to this loyalty.
Right.
If a close friend betrays her, the punishment she enacts is exponentially worse than it would be for a stranger because the sacred debt of loyalty was broken.
I understand why you'd think that sounds like genuine friendship, but the reality is that loyalty, for her, isn't about deep emotional affection or love as we understand it. It is entirely transactional.
It's about ownership again.
Exactly. She protects her inner circle because they are an extension of her own ego. They belong to her. Furthermore, by being fiercely protective, they become deeply indebted to her, ensuring they won't stab her in the back. It is mutually assured protection, not love.
Which brings us to the most stable relationship in her life. Her husband, Sam.
Yeah, let's talk about Sam.
By her own account, he is incredibly stable. He grounds her chaotic impulses. He diffuses her rage, not with counter-rage, but with humor.
Oh, she gives this crazy example where she secretly spent $10,000 on high-end makeup behind his back.
Which is an insane amount of money for makeup.
Right. And most spouses would absolutely lose their minds. But when he found out, instead of raging at her, he calmly sat her down and turned it into a financial learning experience.
He essentially provides the emotional regulation that her brain physically cannot produce on its own. She notes that he actually cures her anxiety, primarily because he doesn't suffer from any anxiety himself. He acts as an external nervous system, a biological anchor for her chaos.
Which begs an obvious question. If traditional empaths are so easily victimized, why don't sociopaths just date other sociopaths?
That's a logical question.
Right. They would understand the rules of the game perfectly.
Yeah.
But she actually laughs at that idea in the interview.
Yeah.
She says it would be absolute hell on earth.
Why is that?
Because of the extreme narcissism and incredibly fragile ego tied to ASPD. Two sociopaths would constantly be trying to one-up, out-manipulate, and ultimately destroy each other. There would be no anchor, just two hurricanes colliding.
And there is a statistical ray of hope for the longevity of her marriage. The Cleveland Clinic data cited in the source material states that the most destructive symptoms of antisocial personality disorder typically peak between the ages of 20 and 40.
Okay.
And they tend to naturally calm down or burn out after age 40. The sheer biological energy required to maintain the impulsivity and rage wanes.
So she is banking on literally aging out of her worst impulses before she destroys her marriage. But reading all of this, it makes you deeply wonder, where does a mind like this actually come from?
Is it nature or nurture?
Exactly. Let's get into the origin story because it is heavy, and it explains so much of the architecture we've been discussing.
The childhood environment described in the source is a textbook perfect storm of severe trauma colliding with a total lack of boundaries. She was raised in a family fraught with extreme domestic violence.
Right. Her father routinely and severely physically abused her mother.
There is even a horrific generational story she shares where her grandfather burned her aunt alive over premarital sex.
Violence was the baseline language of the household. It wasn't an anomaly. It was the primary method of communication.
Yeah.
Yet, paradoxically, the subject herself was shielded from the direct violence and treated like a princess by her violent father.
She was the golden child.
Yeah, she was heavily bribed to simply go to school with Barbie dolls. She was given absolutely zero discipline or structure.
So consider the psychological development here. She witnesses extreme violence daily, internalizing the lesson that power, aggression, and lack of empathy are what control the environment.
While facing no consequences herself.
But simultaneously, she never experiences a single consequence for her own negative actions. It builds an impenetrable, reinforced sense of grandiosity. She learns that the rules apply to the weak, but not to her.
And this developmental cocktail culminates in her formal psychological evaluation. She was tested using the PCLR, which is the Hare Psychopathy Checklist revised. It is the gold standard diagnostic tool for psychopathy. She scored a staggering 32 out of 40.
To give you necessary clinical context on that number, a score of 30 or above generally indicates clinical psychopathy. Ted Bundy, one of the most notorious manipulative serial killers in American history, scored a 39.
She got a 32. And she actually jokes in the interview about where she lost points on the rubric.
Which is quite morbid.
It is. The PCLR measures two factors: interpersonal and affective traits like grandiosity and lack of remorse, and social deviance like criminal versatility. She scored perfectly on the affective traits.
So why didn't she score higher?
She did score higher purely because she managed to avoid a formal criminal record, and surprisingly, she does not harm animals. In fact, she absolutely loves her cats and explicitly says she would violently defend them.
But carrying a score of 32 indicates a life fraught with profound internal chaos. When a human being operates without an internal moral compass, without the guardrails of guilt, the biological search for dopamine, stimulation, and relief can lead to incredibly dark places.
We see this clearly in her early adulthood. At age 21, suffering from chronic severe migraines and feeling ignored by medical professionals, she casually attempted suicide.
Just casually.
Yeah, she swallowed 15 amitriptyline pills. She didn't describe it as a moment of profound despair or cry for help. She described it as nonchalant, just a cold, practical solution to physical pain.
And then there was the addiction.
Right. Later in life, she fell into a severe oxycodone addiction while living in Spain, consuming up to 80 milligrams a day.
Severe substance abuse is incredibly common with ASPD. The drugs amplify the rage and the impulsivity, but they also temporarily satisfy that relentless need for stimulation. During this period in Spain, she accrued $30,000 in credit card debt, flying first class around the world, completely and utterly detached from the reality of the financial consequences.
So how does someone with a PCLR score of 32, a history of heavy addiction, and a brain devoid of empathy stop themselves from utterly destroying their own life and everyone around them? Her solution is one of the most fascinating parts of this entire deep dive.
What does she do?
She turned to religion, specifically the rigid structure of Russian Orthodox Christianity.
This raises an important question. Can a moral compass be entirely outsourced? Because she recognizes that she lacks internal guardrails, she willingly chose to lock herself into the intense, external, unyielding structure of this specific church.
She adheres to strict fasting schedules. She stands for grueling 2-hour services. She adheres to strict modesty guidelines.
The source notes conservative figure Charlie Kirk was actually an inspiration for this transition,
Yeah.
but we're focusing on the psychological utility of the religion for her, not the politics.
Exactly. I picture it like bumpers in a bowling alley.
Yeah.
She knows that left to her own devices, she throws a moral gutter ball every single time.
That's a brilliant way to phrase it.
So she actively chose to put up the heavy iron bumper rails of strict religious doctrine. She loves that the church acts as a hospital, not a courtroom. It gives her absolute, non-negotiable rules to follow so she doesn't ruin her own life.
It requires a profound, almost paradoxical level of self-awareness. She fully recognizes that she is a predator, and she is actively using theological architecture to cage herself, effectively protecting society from her worst impulses.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, the absolute paradox of her empathy. We've established she has zero empathy for human beings, right?
Right, none.
She stood by and watched her grandfather die and felt absolutely nothing, a flatline. But when she took her cat to the vet for a routine minor injection, she sat in the waiting room and sobbed uncontrollably.
And tears are actually there.
The biological capacity for love is there. It has just completely bypassed humanity and attached itself entirely to an animal.
And if we analyze why, it makes perfect sense within the framework of narcissistic personality disorder. An animal cannot betray her. An animal does not have a complex ego to challenge hers. An animal will not judge her past or try to outmanipulate her. Therefore, it is perfectly safe to love something that cannot hold you accountable.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a massive amount of psychological ground today. We've gone from the mechanics of masks to the architecture of cages to outsourced morality. Let's recap some incredibly practical takeaways for you, the listener.
The cheat sheet.
Yes, based on the clinical source material, here is your cheat sheet for spotting a potential sociopath in your own life. Number 1, the yawn test.
Contagious yawning when you yawn because you see someone else yawn is deeply linked to our biological capacity for empathy. Because individuals with ASPD lack that empathy network, they often will not catch a yawn if you visibly yawn in front of them.
Number 2, the Duchenne smile. When a sociopath smiles, remember, they are performing an emotion they don't feel. Look at their eyes, not their mouth.
A genuine, spontaneous smile crinkles the corners of the eyes, the Duchenne markers.
A performed, calculated smile stops at the cheeks. The eyes remain dead. And number 3, proxemics and gaze. They will invade your personal space too quickly, and they will hold intense, unblinking eye contact.
This isn't out of deep connection. It is an instinctual test to assert dominance and see if you will submit and look away first.
And perhaps the most important takeaway of all, which the subject herself stresses heavily in the transcript. If you have been victimized, manipulated, or destroyed by someone with these traits, it is not your fault.
You weren't stupid.
You weren't weak. You didn't do something to deserve it.
Yeah.
You were simply selected. You were targeted by someone playing a brutal, complex game whose rules you didn't even know existed. But I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder as we wrap up this deep dive.
That's an important one.
We have spent this whole time being horrified by these manipulative tactics. We recoil at the masks, the calculated rotation of partners, the utilization of people purely for their skills, the total lack of emotional interference. We find it monstrous in personal relationships.
But look at the broader world we live in. How many of those exact same traits, ruthless calculation, maintaining multiple polished personas, viewing people purely as disposable assets, operating without the heavy burden of guilt or remorse, are actively rewarded, celebrated, and promoted to the very top of the corporate ladder in modern society?
Are we only disturbed by sociopathy when it happens in our living rooms instead of our boardrooms? It really makes you wonder who is actually running the world.
It definitely reframes things.
At the start of this deep dive, we talked about the polygraph machine. How terrifying it is to imagine someone sitting there, lying through their teeth, with a perfectly flat heart rate. Human psychology will never be as clean as reading a machine's output. But by understanding the specific mechanics of a mind that operates in the dark, the invisible traps become just a little bit easier to see. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. See you next time.